Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me? Very good. Okay. Yeah, welcome to ODI Global. I'm Hans-Peter Lankes. I'm Deputy Chief Executive here, and I'm standing in for Sarah Pontuliano, who has literally lost her voice. And therefore, I'm going to do as best I can to represent her position here and introduce this event. So it's a pleasure to see such a diverse group of experts and practitioners. In fact, diverse even within ODI Global. We have several teams working together on this because this is a cross-cutting thematic. On this conference on reimagining financing in conflict-affected contexts, which is hosted by the ERIC Research Consortium. And in this context, let me thank the UK government, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, for generously funding this event and the research that stands behind it. So thanks for taking time for being part of what I expect to be a very stimulating, insightful discussion here today. The needs in fragile and conflict-affected settings continue to grow. We know that. And at the same time, aid budgets in many countries are under pressure. That means that questions about the scale and the effectiveness of financing have become more urgent. And that's the basic challenge for us here today. Just a couple of perspectives on this issue. In the early 1990s, around 65 countries classified as low-income countries under the World Bank's criteria. Those held about 60% of the global population. In 2019, just about 30 years later, only 31 countries classified as low-income countries, and those held less than 10% of the global population, but almost half of the world's absolute poor. There's a very significant overlap between that list of countries and those on the fragility and conflict list. And that means that, on the one hand, humanity has seen a very successful period of poverty reduction and of promoting development, but also that the core of the development challenge today is in countries that are also key humanitarian recipients. A second perspective is that ODI has been cut cumulatively by around 1/5 over the past 2 years, with probably more to come, and within that total decline, a disproportionate loss of funding for humanitarian causes. At the same time, and as a result of reforms to the multilateral development banking system, there's been an increase in lending capacity for development by roughly a similar amount, $50 to $60 billion a year. I read this as implying a challenge for us collectively to make sure that enough of that firepower for development flows into low-income countries and fragile and conflict-affected settings, which is not happening today. And of course, it raises the question of how to shift the balance between humanitarian and development finance in these countries towards approaches that enable and build local capacity rather than substituting for that capacity. And that makes today's conversation particularly timely. We have the opportunity to engage with rigorous research on financing in conflict-affected settings and to reflect on how that evidence can inform ongoing thinking around FCAS strategies, including at the World Bank, which is in the middle of adopting a new strategy for those countries, and for the UK government. And BII, for instance, is in the middle of adopting a new strategy which puts the fragile and conflict-affected settings very much at the core. So this morning, we will hear from government representatives, from researchers, from practitioners in health, education, and social protection, and we'll explore why current financing approaches do not always deliver the results that we aim for in protracted conflict settings. And after lunch, the focus will shift towards practical solutions and emerging examples of more effective ways of working. And that should include discussion of whether MDBs and bilateral donors are well positioned to prioritize these ways of working going forward. I'm very pleased to begin today's program with opening remarks from Simon McNaughton. Simon is Deputy Director for Research in the FCDO's Research and Analysis Directorate. He recently served as the UK's Regional Director for Science and Technology in India. And since 2014, Simon has worked across research, development, and humanitarian roles in the UK civil service, including postings in Nairobi and Beirut. So few people will be better positioned to talk us through the range of issues that we're facing today. Warm welcome, Simon, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Hans. We probably should have double-checked our speeches because I'm going to use some of the same statistics you use, but some different ones as well. So hopefully not too much confusion. And just to apologise as well, I've got a bad cough, not as bad as Sarah, so I'm going to try and power through this one. So first of all, just good morning, and thank you to ODI Global for hosting this conference on reimagining finance in conflict settings. My name is Simon McNaughton. As Hans said, I'm Deputy Director for Research at FCDO, part of our Research and Analysis Directorate, and I'm here today on behalf of FCDO, which funds the ERIC programme. I want to open by giving some additional context for today's conversation. So as many of you know, over the last decade, the centre of extreme poverty has shifted towards fragile and conflict-affected countries, with nearly 60% of people in extreme poverty now living in FCAS contexts. Many countries are also in a state of polycrises, with overlapping shocks, conflict, climate disasters, additional protracted crises, disrupting economies and societies before previous emergencies can be resolved. And protracted conflict settings, where crises last between 5 and 25 or even more years, are a unique subset of FCAS contexts, where emergency and development financing are needed both at the same time. Now, you're meeting today at a time when there is a small amount of upheaval globally. We know that a lot of bilateral development funding is being scaled back, and at the same time, there's also a contraction in humanitarian funding cuts. We saw that last year. We're going to see probably further contractions this year. And these cuts have real-world impact. The Interagency Standing Committee recently flagged that over 6,000 health facilities and 20 emergencies have been suspended or closed, affecting 5 to 6 million people. So it's important for us to be honest about the situation that we're facing today. FCDO, like a lot of bilateral donors, is making difficult decisions about our funding, including through reductions. We're also modernising our approach to development in response to the changing world and our commitment to work closely with partner countries to deliver the development that these partners want and need. Now, as the Minister for Development set out last year, we're transforming our country development partnerships and reflecting the changing needs of our partners through 4 essential shifts. So moving from donor to investor, from service delivery to system support, from grants to expertise, and from international intervention to local provision. And through it all, with less money, we must make difficult choices and focus on greater impact. And therefore, it's the perfect time, it's a key time to maximise the use of evidence to inform our work and to ensure the greatest possible value for money of the finance we provide. Now, through teams in my directorate, FCDO has funded a significant body of research on service delivery in fragile conflict and violent FCV situations. The evidence shows that gains in access to health, education and social protection can be made and protected even during conflict, and supporting services and maintaining building systems is possible. But it also highlights some areas where we can use today's event to ask some challenging questions. So the evidence shows that effective, inclusive and sustainable service delivery in FCV contexts depends less on technical design and more on navigating political realities, supporting local systems and managing trade-offs explicitly and continuously. So the first question is, how do we best engage and support local actors and manage the inevitable trade-offs? But aid is only one part of the picture. A recent ERIC paper showed the scale of government and household contributions to education sector financing was far greater relative to external aid. And that challenges the narratives that we hear quite often about the extent of aid dependency in conflict-affected contexts. It also evidences issues with humanitarian funding, volatility and transparency, and it's things I've seen in roles overseas, which has implications on the quality of education interventions provided via humanitarian intermediaries. And again, this emphasises the need to look at how we can work with what exists and promote long-term sustainability. So how can we better align our support with local and domestic resources? And while there's no one size fits all, we often see a default to parallel provisioning. So even though we know it's better to engage with what exists, local or national, formal or informal, a key challenge is then to identify, combine, layer and sequence delivery functions across international and local actors in ways that sustain access, minimize harm, and promote long-term sustainability. So how can we better coordinate to sustain access, minimize harm, and promote long-term sustainability? It's exciting to be able to learn across sectors, and the evidence shows that programming approaches are often siloed in sectors, so education, health, social protection, as examples, and a more joined-up approach is needed with more exchange of learning and evidence across sectors. And that's what makes today's discussion so pertinent and relevant, building on our evidence and provided through FCDO-funded research programs I mentioned, and also looking at how we can work differently to improve outcomes and impact, recognizing the limitations, obviously, in the funding landscape. And so it's encouraging today to see multiple FCDO-funded consortia to conflict-affected settings coming together, including colleagues from ERIC, Rebuild, BASIC, to pool knowledge and navigate this challenging environment. And this includes bringing together sector specialists from those sectors, education, health, social protection, and I'm sure wider, with deep contextual understanding of the conflict settings to reflect on what has and what hasn't worked, and to clarify the trade-offs associated with the different paths forward. And so with the Humanitarian Finance Summit convening tomorrow, today's discussion is also very timely. It will test our assumptions, surface insights, and consolidate lessons that can inform and strengthen the conversations ahead. So thank you for giving me the time to speak today. I hope what I've said and the questions I've asked have resonated a bit and helped frame your approach to the discussions you're going to have today. And I wish you some really good conversations and thoughtful discussions. I'm going to stick around for the morning. I won't be able to say much into the afternoon, but I just want to thank you all for having me here today. Thank you.